The Southern African Development Community, or SADC, has reached an agreement with M23 rebels to facilitate the withdrawal of the SADC mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and their equipment. Additionally, they will assess the status of the Goma International Airport for readiness for reopening, with SADC offering assistance and the repair of the airport to facilitate the withdrawal. Well, South Africa has lost 14 soldiers in the conflict. And we have Helmoed-Römer Heitman, defense expert, in the studio to help us look at what will follow. But before we get Helmut's views, here are some scenes courtesy of Kivo News 24 on X of jubilant South African soldiers taking selfies with an M23 spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Willem Goma in the Green Beret, during his visits to the SADC camp, where he relayed information about the ceasefire. So is the end in sight for South African soldiers?
Yep.
They were confined to their bases in Goma and Sake. What was it, for over 2 months?
Almost entirely dependent on the goodwill of M23 to be able to access food, fresh water and the like. Except at the airport, where at least the fresh water was coming from the neighboring Uruguayan unit. And in fact, of course, it wasn't just the SADC mission that was stuck. It was some MONUSCO troops as well at Goma Airport. So it was a problem. The bottom line of the whole thing is that the mission was ill-conceived to start with. It failed utterly, and then the troops were stuck. We couldn't, well, not just we, I mean Tanzania, Malawi too. We couldn't reinforce them, we couldn't supply them, we couldn't extract them, because the only available airports were occupied by M23, or the relatively close airports. And airports further away, you had to go through M23 controlled territory to get there. So they were stymied. I was worried because President Ramaphosa and others kept saying, oh, we're going to continue with the mission, just not there, we'll withdraw those. So then, well, if we keep saying we're going to continue trying to block M23, why would they let us withdraw our troops? They're just hostages. But then finally they did come to an agreement, and to me it was quite interesting that while the decision was taken at the political level, the negotiation that finally produced the result was military. It was generals and colonels talking to each other from all sides. And there's a matter of interest there, when the final settlement in Angola was also the generals, because General Veldhuis, the South African general, was tired of all the drip traps to fancy hotels in various capitals around the world that the diplomats so love. So he excused himself from a boarding session, went to the bar, ordered a drink, and sent a message to his Cuban and Angolan counterpart to join him. They joined him, they had drinks, and over drinks and cigars, they sorted out the settlement. And then they drew straws, he got the short straw. They went back into the meeting room and he tapped on the table with his Zippo, and when everybody looked, he said, right, my colleagues and I have worked out how this is going to work. The Foreign Affairs people have never forgiven him or his two military colleagues, because it destroyed the plans for at least several months more of meetings in fancy hotels and fancy resort towns. The bottom line is the policy decision has got to be taken by the politicians, but the practical stuff, soldiers are much better at that. They understand each other. They don't have personal animosities. They don't generally have ego problems. So it worked here too. The problem now is, of course, we've got to make it work to get them out. For the moment, they seem to have freedom of action out on Goma, or freedom of movement, which is good. The airport will have to be repaired. I believe the damage is minimal. But then it's going to take time, because there's a lot of equipment to get out, and it's going to be expensive. We have to charter aircraft, because we have no airlift left. We didn't have any heavy airlift to start with. So that's issue one. It's going to take time, and you have to hope that nobody does anything stupid during that time. For instance, we still have South African troops at Lubumbashi in the Congo. Now, what are they doing there? If somebody in the government here gets up and says, oh, well, we're going to continue the mission against M23 afterwards, well, that'll be the end of the evacuation. So we need to be careful there. More worrying is the foreign minister, DRC, in an interview recently, said that, the SADC mission will only leave when M23 and the Rwandan army have withdrawn from Goma. Well, that isn't the agreement. And that could torpedo the whole damn thing. So I'm happy that we reached the agreement. I'm hoping it works out. And I keep my fingers crossed.
Well, as you said, it exists on paper now, or between generals. What will the implementation entail, apart from fixing the runway? Well, how many troops? What weapons? Vehicles?
Okay, it's not clear how many troops actually deployed. They never deployed the full 5,000, and South Africa never deployed the full 2,900. I think South African troops, they're probably about 1,200, 1,300 there, and then there are a few hundred from Tanzania and Malawi. Now, Tanzania is fairly easy. They can drive through Rwanda and go home. And Rwanda will not want to offend Tanzania too much because the export routes go through Tanzania and the import routes. So that'll be okay. Malawi, a bit more tricky to get home from there, but on the other hand, Malawi is not exactly a major military power anywhere, so there probably won't be hassles. Unless someone does something stupid and it all falls down. So from a South African point of view, you've got to get those 1,200 odd people out, and then the equipment. Now the people, probably what I would do is get out most of the admin type staff, the cooks and the bottle washers and whatever, and a growing proportion of the infantry, assuming that the situation stays stable. Then start getting the equipment out, and the combat troops out. Probably the special forces teams last, being the most competent guys. Equipment, I know there's at least six G5s there. Or I believe there are at least six G5s there with their gun tractors. They're big stuff. There's at least a troop, I think, of 235mm anti-aircraft guns with the associated radar. That could be flown out in a Hercules. Not that we have a Hercules flying at the moment, but it could be. But the bottom line is they will need fairly heavy airlift vehicles. Then there are quite a lot of Mambas and some Caspers and assorted trucks and stuff to get out. I think some of the stores and supplies that were taken in will probably just be left behind. There's not much point bringing old tents and bedding and whatever it is back. It costs more to bring it back than would be to buy new here. So, why bother? Possibly even some of the shelters, the containerized stuff. Take out the equipment and leave the shelter behind. There's nothing to it. So I think that's probably the sequence. Get most of the troops out first and start getting the sensitive equipment out, communications equipment, any electronic warfare stuff that's there, then the heavy equipment, and then the vehicles, and even there's some standard commercial type vehicles that they took up as well, pickups. Whether they are worth flying back out is another question. They probably just auction them off there or even just abandon them. Again, cheaper to buy here than to fly it back. So that's probably the sequence, assuming all goes well, and once the runway has been repaired. I don't think there's a hell of a lot of damage to that runway, so that should be okay. There's still one Oryx helicopter standing as non-flying. That will need to be extracted, again, in a larger aircraft. I don't know what's going to happen to the MONUSCO troops at Goma Airport. Whether MONUSCO will stay at Goma or whether they're also going to withdraw. Now, I know when it all started, the MONUSCO leadership promptly decamped to Entebbe. The good old UN doing its thing, but anyway. But there are still troops there, Uruguayans and some others. Whether they will also be withdrawn to other MONUSCO bases in the DRC or whether they'll stay put, I don't know. Even some at a bit further south towards Bukavu. And it's not clear to me what happened to them when that area was taken by M23. But for us, that's sort of the sequence. It's going to take weeks, possibly months, to get everything out. It took a long time to deploy. So it's going to take time. And we just have to hope, as I said, nobody does anything silly or says anything silly in the meantime.
So what are the stumbling blocks, apart from what you said, that the DRC has already said, no, this is not how it's going to happen?
Well, that's the big one. I'm not sure whether we would necessarily listen to the DRC on this one. We do keep saying, it's an SADC thing and we're there at the invitation, blah, blah. But I think if we were to delay the withdrawal of our troops because the DRC government is having the jitters, it would probably be a bad PR blowback here for the government. So I'm inclined to think they'll talk their way around that to get the guys out anyway. They don't serve any purpose there. They can't do anything, so what's the point? Other stumbling blocks, as I say, somebody on either side doing something stupid or saying something deeply stupid. The other one would be getting the airlift organized and finding the money to pay for it. Now, the money that was allocated by Treasury to the Defense Force for the mission will now probably be used to fund the withdrawal. And now we've got to organize the transport aircraft, get them going, and start getting the stuff back bit by bit. It should be smooth. It shouldn't be problematical. We have people who know how to do this sort of thing. and done it before. So as long as nobody does anything silly, I don't see any problems, except it will take time. And of course, the longer it takes, the more chance that something goes wrong.
You talked about weeks or maybe months. So when do you think we could be out of there?
Hell, I don't know. I don't know how many vehicles actually went in there. But I mean, it took several months to deploy. So it's going to take several months probably to withdraw. They were flying out using a single Ocean 76 that was doing a daily flight. So that means just bringing out the artillery, that would already be probably 12 flights, anti-aircraft another 6 or so, and then heavy vehicles. So you're already talking about probably about a month before the vehicle's out, let alone anything else. Depends, as I say, on how many aircraft they can get hold of, and then fly the stuff out. And of course, when will the airport runway be ready? Now, what I heard was the only damage was some craters from mortar bombs. Those won't be big craters. They're not really a problem. They're easily filled and stabilized. The mortar bombs don't make big holes. So it shouldn't be a problem. But shouldn't is the key word there. I can't say it will not be.
Deputy President Paul Mashatile said it should not be considered as a defeat. Do you agree?
No, afraid not. Okay, to be fair to the soldiers on the ground, which is relevant to me, I don't really care about the politicians. The soldiers on the ground were not defeated. Their base was never overrun. They inflicted quite a lot of casualties and damage on M23, but they were in a position where they couldn't do anything beyond that, beyond survive. So they did. They put up enough of a fight that M23 and I guess Rwanda decided it wasn't worth trying to actually overrun the base. It's going to be too costly and not achieve much. So the soldiers, per se, were not defeated. But of course, the mission was a total failure. I mean, the SADC mission was supposedly going to neutralize M23 and was instead neutralized by M23. Now, if that isn't a failure, I don't know what is. So at the mission level, at the national level, it's a defeat. The German troops stranded on the Channel Islands at the end of World War II were not defeated by an invasion, but they're a part of a defeated army. Now, it's the way the cookie crumbles. What concerns me is that if the South African government doesn't understand or grasp that the mission was defeated, and why? Because it was the wrong mission, too few troops, no air support, etc., then they will suffer continued delusions of grandeur, and they'll try something silly again. They need to accept this was a failure. It's not called a defeat, it's called a failure. And go back to the drawing board. And I've argued elsewhere, given the state of the Defence Force at the moment, and given the embarrassment of this, which has been a knock to the standing of the Defence Force, rather unfairly, because it's not the soldiers' fault, not even the senior officers' fault. Given those problems, personally I would say we should stand down for a decade. So now, if we're going to spend the next 10 years rebuilding the Defence Force, focusing on being able to do local stuff, actually patrolling our own waters, which at the moment we can't do, monitoring and policing our airspace properly, which we also can't do at the moment, our land borders as well, and having enough of a contingency capability if things in Mozambique and Cabo Delgado go really sour, that we can actually deploy there with a credible force, unlike last time where the force was too small with no air support, to do something about it. Or should there be, say, an insurgency in Lesotho, which is not a very stable country, or shall we rather say it's a fragile country, then that would automatically spill over into South Africa. So we need to be able to secure that. So that would be my first plan for the next decade. Get us a point where we can deal with things like that. Then we can think, okay, do we again want to play a regional role commensurate with our economic clout and commensurate with our interests in Africa? Because Africa is a major export market to South Africa, and a very profitable one because it's right next door to us, and we're the closest manufacturing economy to Africa, south of Sahara. So, in simple self-interest terms, a stable, peaceful, prosperous sub-Saharan Africa is good for us. And where there are problems, it makes sense to help try and resolve those problems. And sometimes that requires military force, or maybe just a presence, sometimes actual force. But you can't do it if you don't have the baseball bat. You've heard of the baseball bat theory of peacekeeping. If you go down the road, so looking fit and mean and smacking a baseball bat in your other hand, the chances of the local bombs trying to accost you are somewhat reduced. Can you wander down looking innocent? Well, yeah, okay. So that would be my view. It's 10 years of staying at home. An absolutely benign peacekeeping operation, maybe we could deploy some infantry. It's always good. That's practical soldiering. People learn a lot, get exposure. But nothing in the peace enforcement line, because we simply don't have the capability now. Afterwards, 10 years down the line, it's going to take not just 10 years, it's going to take money, a lot of money. Because we've got to get equipment serviceable again. Pilots have got to get currency. Ships' crews need to go to sea to gel as crews. Here you have a frigate, and I'm quite happy to believe that every single member of the frigate's crew was properly trained for his or her post aboard the ship. But the crew as a crew won't be properly functional if they haven't spent time at sea. Same with an army. Units must exercise as units. A couple of weeks at the combat training center, driving around, eating dust, getting tired, whatever, and seeing who bites whose head off first in the headquarters when things go out of control. Then the units become functional. Now that is also going to take time and cost money. So it'll be a while before South Africa surfaces from this one, if we are wise. If we're unwise, we'll try something again and probably get a bloody nose this time.
Helmoed-Römer Heitman, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.